Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Billy Beck. I'm the Extension Forestry Specialist and Assistant Professor in the Department of Natural Resource Ecology and Management at Iowa State. I'm very excited to be here today, and I really want to thank Susan for this opportunity, and want to thank you all for attending. I'm going to talk about two things that are very, very close to my heart, and that's how forests and trees impact water quality, coming at you from both the rural and the urban perspectives. There's a lot that of the concepts can be applied to both. And I'm not going to bombard you with a lot of figures and graphs and whatnot today. I think the essence of today is just to get on your radar that forests and trees are critical for water quality and quantity or flooding in this state, and just to work to advocate for the protection of streamside areas and streamside forests, especially in both our rural and in our urban areas. So this is College Creek in Ames, a urban-suburban stream. We've all seen issues with water quality and flooding in suburban areas, especially as development spreads out. This was 2 years ago, about a day before my PhD defense. So as you can imagine, I was a nervous wreck. But I ran outside to take a picture of this because I'm really interested in hydrology and forestry, and it really lifted my spirits. So again, happy to talk about these concepts today. So, kind of a rundown. I'd like to introduce myself and my position. I'm still fairly new, or I feel fairly new to this position. So just trying to get my name out there and meet all you and let you know that I am a resource if you need help. I'd also like to introduce forestry and hydrology, two terms that a lot of folks don't really know what they mean. I know when I go to family gatherings, my family still really doesn't know what I do. So maybe I'll have them watch this and we can see, we'll define these two terms. Then I want to get into the meat of it, how trees impact water quality and quantity. And then I'm going to start from the rural perspective and then transfer that over to the urban. And then kind of talk about some threats to streamside trees and how that may impact water quality. And kind of give you a list of resources and a little to-do list, a little fun to-do list following up today's talk here. So again, this is me. My name is Billy Beck. I'm the Extension Forestry Specialist with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. I'm also an assistant professor in the Department of Natural Resource Ecology and Management at ISU. So I'm responsible for forestry education and extension across all 99 counties of Iowa. I deal almost exclusively with rural forest lands and rural forest management. But I do have some experience in the urban setting, so I'm going to try to transfer the concepts of rural to urban today. And in addition to extension, I do research and teaching at Iowa State. And my background, as you'll see, is with trees and water. So my research, teaching, and extension all focus on the impacts that trees and forest management have to water quality and flooding, and how do we use trees and forestry to address those issues in our state. So there's our website. Feel free to check it out. It's got everything you could ever want as far as natural resource information, from wildlife to aquaculture. So check that out, forestry included. There's my email, and if you want to follow my antics on social media, you can do so at the bottom there. And on the right, that's me. I don't think anybody has seen me without a mask since March, so there you go. And again, if you think of me, just think trees and water. I'm a forester by background. I'm also a hydrologist and water quality kind of expertise. So I try to combine those two to look at the impacts that trees have on cleaning up our water and addressing the flooding issues we're seeing in this state. So if you think of me, think of trees and water. I'm also related to a master gardener, so shout out to Mom. That's her garden club in Michigan. But I appreciate the good stuff that you all do, and I appreciate the good stuff that this program does out in the world. So thank you for all your hard work. Okay, so again, my job is to promote forestry across the state of Iowa. So I'm going to start off with defining forestry, because I really think a lot of folks don't know what it is exactly. So forestry, as defined by the Society of American Foresters, which is kind of our home base professional group, is the science, art, and business of creating, managing, and conserving forests and associated resources in a sustainable manner to meet desired goals, needs, and values. So this spans both urban forestry and rural forestry. We've got an urban canopy in the state and a rural canopy. Again, both very, very critical. And in my own words, I just think we try to manage these systems for the economic and societal gain, but also all the amazing ecosystem services that these areas provide, like clean water, clean air, carbon sequestration, wildlife. I mean, the list goes on and on. So to me, that's what forestry is. And it's very, very broad, but it's all about managing these systems to get what we want and then also to get the environmental benefits that are needed. And I tell folks a lot of times, forest management often involves killing and harvesting trees, and that's okay, because we always work as professional foresters to ensure that the next generation of forest is waiting in the wings when we remove these trees. They're waiting there to take on the new available resources, such as sunlight, like you see on the bottom right. So before we do any kind of cutting, we really want to make sure that we know the future impact and we know that we're going to have a sustainable resource in the future. So cutting is involved with forest management, but it's okay. A lot of folks, again, I promote forestry in Iowa. A lot of folks do not associate forests and trees with Iowa. We have a rich history here of forestry. It's a part of our state. It's a part of who we are. This is a harvesting operation in central Iowa. This is a machine. It's called a harvester and a forwarder. You'd see this down south or in the Pacific Northwest or in the Great Lakes. Not too much in Iowa, but we do have this kind of machinery here. But I always tell folks, trees, forests, and forestry are a big part of Iowa. They're a part of who we are, just like prairie and hogs and soybeans. Some quick facts. We've got 3 million acres of forest, down from about 7 million in the mid-1800s. 150,000 forest landowners. $10 to $35 million of standing timber sold annually. This should be way higher, but that's a discussion for another day. 30,000 jobs supported by the industry, $43 billion in economic input, according to a recent analysis. We grow some of the highest quality white oak and black walnut on earth. Iowa State University is one of the oldest forestry programs in the U.S. That's pretty amazing. Iowa's got about 8% of its land cover in forest, but about 30%, over 30% actually, of the riparian or streamside areas are forested. So this is a good kind of segue into the next bit. It really means that forests play a big, big role in water quality and flood mitigation in this state, because where they are located, they're located along our streams and rivers. Hydrology, really quick, we're kind of merging trees and hydrology today, is the science that encompasses the occurrence, distribution, movement, and properties of water over the earth, and how that relationship varies with the environment that they're in. So to me, it's basically how water moves across the earth and through the earth, and that really depends on the environment. Is it flowing through a prairie watershed, an urban watershed, a forested watershed, an agricultural watershed? And in Iowa, we often have a mix of those components. So those environments, as we'll see, really affect how the water cycle, how water moves as it leaves the clouds and enters the earth across the landscape. And as you'll see today, urban and rural environments are not as different as you would think as far as hydrology and the impacts that we see to them. All right. So I'm going to start you off at the rural perspective. So that's kind of where I work the most. But Iowa is, again, one of the most altered states in the U.S. as far as land cover. And to understand, kind of set the stage here for the good things that trees and forests do for water quality, we really got to know what we've done to the landscape for the past, few hundred years. So really it all comes down to we've, what I call, decreased the sponge. We've decreased the ability of the landscape to retain precipitation events and deliver that water slowly to the stream through shallow groundwater. So before European settlement, we had vast spans of prairie and forest with deep rooting systems, which allowed for an incredible, what they call, infiltration capacity. So when it rained, the land had an incredible ability to soak up the rainwater, store it for long periods of time, and then transfer it to the stream slowly as shallow groundwater. Now what we've done, we've converted that to row crop agriculture, to parking lots, to housing developments, to all these other things that we need for society. But that those land covers have a lower ability to soak up rainwater. And so when it does rain, a lot of the water goes off the surface of the earth and immediately into the channel all in one big pulse. So we've kind of introduced a lot more water to our streams all at once. And you'll see in a sec the ramifications of that. Another thing that we've done is we've altered our stream shape. So as you can see here on the left, the green is back in 1930 and the red is today. So we've become very, very, very good at getting water off the landscape, out of these watersheds immediately, very, very quickly. And we did this to allow it to be farmed back in the early turn of the century. We wanted the water off the landscape so we could more readily farm it. And what you see with this is called channelization. They've basically taken away the sinuosity of the stream and made it a straight pipe. And when you do that, you really increase the slope of the stream. And that has an impact on something called stream power. Stream power is a factor of stream slope and the discharge. So if you increase stream slope, or if you increase the volume of water passing through the channel at one time, which is called stream discharge, you're going to increase stream power and the ability of that stream to erode and transport pollutants such as nutrients and bacteria and all those other things too. So what we've done is we've increased stream slope by channelizing these streams like that, and we've increased the discharge by draining the landscape with tile drainage, but also reducing that infiltration capacity of the surface of the earth so that more water runs off the surface of the earth quickly and not through the earth. So in a nutshell, what we've done is we've made a very flashy flow. So as you see on the right, these streams respond incredibly quickly to precipitation events. That yellow circle, that debris up in the trees there is from a recent storm event. We were out there very soon afterwards, and you can see how high it gets and how far it drops down in a very, very short period of time. And if you can imagine the amount of water rushing through that tiny little creek all at once, that's a lot of stream power going through there. So that's what we call flashy hydrology. So the results of all this and this flashy hydrology, we're seeing increased erosion and incision. I'm sure y'all have walked around the country, and even in urban areas, you see these very tall vertical stream banks. So the channel is adjusting. It's getting wider and deeper to compensate for this increase in flow that we've seen from the alterations of the surface of the earth. So this has a lot of implications for increasing sediment from the erosion and nutrients, especially phosphorus, which is often attached to sediment, entering our waterways. So this erosion is occurring, it's transporting sediment and phosphorus downstream, it's getting these large vertical banks, so we're just seeing some water quality impacts here from what we've done. This is important because a lot of data these days suggests that most of the phosphorus and sediment exiting watersheds is coming from these eroding stream banks. Another big thing, and this is kind of where we're getting back into trees here, when the channel gets this big, we really see a decreased connection with the floodplain. So it takes one heck of a huge event for this to get up and access its floodplain. So we're seeing a reduction in floodplain connectivity. And that connection with the floodplain is critical for healthy forests and water quality, as we'll see here in a second. So that's a big deal. And also with that decreased connectivity, most of the flow remains in the channel with a lot of power and a lot of force for erosion. So we see some increased downstream flooding impacts when we lose our connectivity with the floodplain, and especially floodplain forests. So we're going to start again in the rural forest arena, and we're going to kind of start at the top of the hill here, that first arrow, and we're going to talk about upland forests, and then we're going to get down into floodplain forests, and then we're going to get down to actually trees that line the stream bank. And we're just going to kind of talk how these organisms and these systems impact the negative consequences that we just discussed in the previous slide. So they do a ton of good stuff, and this could be a class in fall at Iowa State. But we've only got an hour today, so I'll try to give you the highlights here. So again, trees really help in what I'm going to say slowing the flow down and increasing the sponge. So increasing the ability of the earth to absorb precipitation water and transfer it slowly to the streams through shallow subsurface flow instead of having it run off all in one big burst, causing a myriad of water quality problems. And if you start at the top with their canopies, they really do a cool thing called canopy interception. And when it rains, a thin veneer of water sticks to the leaves the entire rain event. And once that rain event is over, that water will then evaporate back up into the atmosphere. So that prevents a good deal of volume of water from entering the stream altogether. So very, very cool there. And you're probably thinking big deal. But if you think of that thin veneer on each leaf, look at the tens of thousands of leaves just in this one photo from Alameda County here. And that's a lot of water. And they've done research on this to see exactly how much water that is. So their roots, there's another big thing that we're going to get on today too. Their roots have an incredible ability to increase the soil infiltration capacity. Forest is by far the highest infiltration capacity of any land cover. Their large roots create large canals in the soil, allow for rapid absorption of precipitation, and again, that slow transfer to the stream through groundwater. The roots also increase the cohesion of the soil. Just the biological processes involved with root growth and death kind of exude a glue into the soil that hold particles together and decreasing their chance to be eroded and transported to the stream that way. They also uptake nutrients and store them above ground. So nitrate, phosphorus, things like that. They store them, preventing them from getting washed into our streams. They also transpire water readily. They suck water out of the soil and evaporate it back up into the atmosphere. And when you do that, when you remove excess moisture from the soil, it really helps to bind the soil particles together, again, increasing the cohesion and reducing the chance that those particles will be eroded and transported into the stream. So upland forests do an amazing job of slowing the flow, allowing water to go slowly to our streams, and increasing the storage capacity of the soil for precipitation events, binding soil together, all kinds of great stuff. And again, a lot of these concepts can be transferred to the urban setting, like we'll see. Moving down to the floodplain, again, these do all the great things that I talked about before, but they have a different role here down on the floodplain. And that really comes down to when the flood events get up and exit their banks. As you can see, this is the Des Moines River, and you can see one of the biggest things they do is those upright stems intercept and slow down flood flows. So to the point where you can kind of see it in this photo in the background, you can see a raging, rapidly going river. But towards us is kind of the floodplain area, and you can see that the water is almost at a standstill. So they do an amazing job of slowing down flood velocities, allowing water to be stored temporarily on the floodplain. And this really has an impact to downstream flooding, because what is downstream of many rural watersheds? It's urban watersheds. So I think these floodplain forests do a great deal of good for addressing downstream flooding impacts, and just by dispersing the energy of that river flow when they get up and out of their banks. Another really cool thing floodplain forests do is they allow for sediment and often phosphorus, which is many times attached to sediment, to be deposited out on the floodplain for long-term storage and keeping them out of our waterways and keeping them out of being transported downstream. Excess sediment and phosphorus, I should say. So yeah, again, when these flood flows exit their banks, the upright stems of forests really slow down the velocity, and at that point, the river just simply can't carry its sediment anymore, and it drops it out and stores it long-term on the floodplain. So very, very cool there. Floodplain forests also act as kind of a two-way filter. So it's not just about impacts from the flow of the flood itself, but what they do is they filter runoff coming from the surface of the earth and prevent that runoff from getting into the surface water the other way. So in addition to reducing like floodplain scour and stream bank erosion and things like that, these systems, and here's a great example, act like a giant filter to kind of buffer. They're literally called riparian forest buffers, blocking what we do in the uplands. We kind of buffer that stream and the water quality along our systems this way. This is a really cool 3-stage buffer out in Audubon County, which has a mix of pollinator habitat, shrubs, and trees. So all great for water quality, and all provide many things for wildlife, the landowner, and society as well. So as we get down to our river margins, trees and other perennial vegetation really do wonders for water quality and flooding. So getting down to the final one is the trees that actually line our stream banks. These are really cool. I do a lot of research on this kind of stuff. And it's often all about the roots. The rooting action has a lot of water quality impacts. So what do roots do? And this is across the watershed, if it's the upland or floodplain or stream bank. Tree roots create greater soil cohesion, like we talked about. Just the process of living and dying and the microbes associated with the roots produce kind of a glue that hold together individual soil particles, the sand, silt, and clay particles, into larger, more stable, what they call aggregates. So this rooting activity is really good for helping soil stay together and decreasing the chance it will be eroded downstream. Soil has a weak tensile strength. That means you can pull it apart very easily, but trees have an incredibly high tensile strength. And people have proved that with engineering methods. So what the roots do is they kind of increase the tensile strength of the soil and help it to not fall off in blocks and protect it from eroding downstream by that increased tensile strength in the soil there. So very, very cool there. They also provide a lot of surface roughness, which again slows down flood velocities, slows down the ability that bank is going to be eroded. And they armored the bank against those high flow events as well. So they're kind of like a big shield sitting here on the bank, protecting these areas from the erosive force of water. And the last thing they do, like we discussed, is they reduce soil moisture through their transpiration efforts. So when they suck water out of the soil and transpire it back into the atmosphere, when you remove that moisture, it allows the soil to become more cohesive and bind solid and again, reduced erosive capacity there. So these roots do a ton of good on our stream banks. Another really neat thing they do, and this is very prevalent in the winter, if you ever get out and look at a bare stream bank in the winter, that vegetative cover, and again, even grass or trees, really buffers against freeze-thaw and wet-dry cycles, which can really make the soil kind of slough off in individual particles, build up at the base of that stream bank, and then be whisked away by the most minimal of flow events. Like you can see here, you can see the line at the bottom of that stream bank. So that vegetative cover is amazing at buffering temperature extremes and preventing this kind of freeze-thaw, wet-dry kind of erosion on stream banks. So again, vegetation along our banks is absolutely critical. And the last thing I'll mention is, I'll show you again, this is big for urban areas too, even bigger maybe, is that these streams, this perennial vegetation, these trees shade the stream, again, buffering the temperature swings we see from day to night in the water. And again, as you know, cooler water can hold more dissolved oxygen, which is good for all the critters that live in our streams. So ton of good stuff that these trees do, from the uplands to the floodplains down to the stream side itself. And they're absolutely critical for our water quality efforts in Iowa, but they're not mentioned a lot. Just an example, we've got the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy, which is a voluntary plan to reduce our nutrient export in this state, and they're really not mentioned it much at all in that document. So that's one of my missions, is to get trees into that document. Lastly, so it's not just the trees themselves, but the wood they produce has a lot of good effects on water quality. And again, this is an interesting issue in urban areas because they do cause localized problems. So I am living in reality here, but in the grand scheme of things, wood in the channel does a lot of good. And this photo is a really great example. This is in central Iowa, but this would look horrendous to most folks. This looks like a mess, a disaster waiting to happen. But there's 3 or 4 big concepts here, how this wood in the channel is promoting water quality and reducing the impacts of downstream flooding. So as the first thing you see on the left, it's cutting a new meander, which, as we talked about, when the stream gets sinuous and meanders around from its from its altered kind of straight form, the slope goes down. So the velocity of that water tends to go down too. These jams and wood trap a lot of sediment and nutrients. So often, many times, phosphorus is attached to that sediment. And the sediment itself can be a pollutant too. So this helps trap and store a lot of the sediment, which builds up the bed and helps to kind of raise the height of the bed and can help with reconnecting the channel to its floodplain in those incised areas. It produces a ton of aquatic habitat for little critters that live in the stream, from fish to plankton. Everything that lives in the stream can benefit from that substrate, that coarse substrate, that heterogeneous substrate in the stream there. And then lastly, it reduces flow velocity. That surface roughness in the channel really does a lot for reducing flood flows and again, thinking about downstream flooding impacts. So when the wood in the stream is good, it will cause localized issues. It's a challenge, but I just wanted to present this to say that, there is some good to having woody recruitment into our streams. Okay, so that's a quick story of our rural landscape. And we're going to switch over to the suburban or urban landscape and kind of just think about those concepts, and they kind of transfer pretty easily. It's very different. Like, again, we said hydrology was a study of how water kind of acts in different environments, and this is definitely a different environment, but the processes are similar, and the impacts that trees have are similar and almost more pronounced in urban areas. So they do a great deal of good. So again, similar to the rural landscape, what have we done? We've converted, this is in Ames, Iowa. This is an old crop field. So we've converted those old crop fields to land cover that has a lower ability to absorb precipitation, so a lower infiltration capacity. And what that means is more water runs off the surface of the earth very quickly and into streams, and it has the same kind of impact we saw before. Very steep stream banks, a lot of erosion, a lot of other issues associated with this as well. Now, keeping in mind that this was once prairie and forest at one time, we lowered the infiltration capacity once by converting it to crops, and then again further by this urbanization here. And there's nothing wrong with this. I live in a house too. I'm just kind of going over the interesting concepts here. So what have we done in these urban areas, and then how can trees kind of help mitigate that? Both the urban canopy in general, but specifically for me, I'm going to talk about the trees that line our streams in urban areas. So urban runoff is very interesting. We've kind of increased our pollutant assemblage as we enter the urban arena. So we're not looking exclusively at nitrate and phosphorus and sediment anymore. We're adding things like brake dust and oil and gasoline. And one of the craziest things I've noticed is the amount of paint chips in urban streams. So street paint. If you go out and look at urban streams, you'll see these bright yellow dots in the sediment that's stored in these urban streams, and it's street paint. So again, just a kind of a different assemblage of pollutants that we're looking at here in urban streams. They're a heat island. If you've ever noticed in spring that campus and town, the trees bloom and the flowers bloom a little bit earlier than their rural counterparts. These urban areas have a greater heat capacity. They can retain heat greater for a longer period of time. So they have a heat island effect. And the water that hits these areas and runs off into the stream is hotter than we'd see in the rural areas. So it's kind of they increase the stream temperature by running off the surface of the earth. Of course, we've reduced our canopy. We've replaced it with compacted soil, sparse trees, cool season grass and lawns, things like that. So again, we've really shrunk the sponge, the ability of this landscape to absorb rainwater and transfer it slowly to streams in the form of groundwater flow. And probably the biggest thing we've done is adding what's called impervious surface. So landscape or land cover that has no ability to absorb water and transfers the water immediately to streams upon impact of the rain. And that's things like roofs and parking lots and roads. And again, there's a lot of soil compaction in these urban areas. So again, the sponge has really shrank down, And one of the coolest things that I think that I observe, if it's ever raining, go down and look at your gutter downspout. Even during a light rain, your gutter downspout is just pumping out water at a very high rate. So what it's doing is taking all that water that fell over that extended roof surface and concentrating it into like a 3-inch circular area. So it really takes all that water that would have been distributed before over a wide area and concentrated it into a high power, highly erosive site. And that's just kind of what we're doing here with urban areas, is we're taking all that water that should have fallen over a large area and concentrating it into sewers and other things that, boom, go directly into our streams and have a lot of erosive ability. And the degradation really begins with about 7% impervious surface, which is not a lot. That's when we kind of start seeing the degradation effects. It's only at 7% impervious. So you can imagine this image here on the right it's much higher than that. So again, just like in the rural setting, we lead to a flashy hydrology with all that. And this is increased erosion, increased nutrient transport. It has aquatic biota impacts you can imagine with that type of flow going through these channels. It's a threat to infrastructure. It's a threat to safety. This is a cool, quick video my buddy, Dr. Morgan Davis at the University of Missouri, took in his front yard of his suburban urban house. And this is over 34 minutes. And watch how fast this thing comes up and goes down in only 34 minutes. So it's quite impressive. And we're back to normal. So yeah, just up and down, a lot of power in there. So very, very impressive of what more impervious surface can do to our hydrology and our hydrologic cycle. So with all that, what the heck can we do in our urban areas as far as trees, our urban canopy, our stream margins to kind of address that hydrological alteration and all the things we've seen from converting first from prairie to ag and then from ag to urban, all those impacts that we've seen. So again, this is a small creek. This is College Creek. I call it Lessons from College Creek. Our little apartment was along College Creek during my grad school days at Iowa State. And this thing is only about 20 to 30 meters wide. It's not very much. It's a beautiful ribbon in a mostly suburban landscape, which has minimal, tree cover, very low ability to absorb rainfall. So this thing is really a gem to not only society and the neighborhood, but for College Creek itself, protecting it from what we're doing on the landscape, and just helps the landscape increase its ability to enhance its hydrologic functioning for water quality and flooding. So like we've been talking about all along, there's so many water quality benefits from having even this small width of trees in an urban area. And we're kind of going to go through, there's many examples here. But just starting with canopy interception. Again, that thin veneer will stick to the leaves during these rain events, and once that event is passed, that will allow that moisture to evaporate back up into the atmosphere. And again, you're thinking, well, big deal. But think about that thin veneer on every leaf and the tens of thousands of leaves, and just take Ames, which has several thousand acres of urban canopy. Think about the volume of water that's saving from rushing into the creek like we've seen in Dr. Davis's video there. So these trees and perennial vegetation here, they increase evapotranspiration. That does two things. It increases the storage capacity in the soil, makes room for more water to be stored. So again, buffering from the large rain events and whatnot. But it also increases soil cohesion. So when we do have flood events, it helps bind that soil tightly together, preventing erosion. Again, these woody roots and perennial roots do wonders for increasing the rainfall infiltration capacity. So even though this is a small strip running through a mostly concrete rooftop landscape, this is really increasing the ability of the landscape to soak up rainfall and deliver it slowly to the stream. Over on the right, we've got floodplain surface roughness. in the form of this grass and woody shrub mix. So again, when streams get up, those upright stems do wonders for slowing the flood velocity and allowing sediment and phosphorus to deposit and things like that. So, and again, this buffer, it filters urban runoff, all the things we talked about before coming from our yards and our parking lots and things like that. Not to mention all the aesthetics and quality of life. So this is a real gem. So again, the essence today is really to advocate for the protection, the establishment, the proper management of these streamside, even though they're very narrow in width, these streamside areas in urban settings. So critical for water quality. Again, here's canopy interception. I love this concept. I show this all the time. Next time it rains, go out in the first 15 minutes or so, you'll see that under trees is completely dry. So that's the volume of water that individual tree has saved from entering the stream in that big kind of initial pulse. So it sends it right back up into the atmosphere. And you can almost see the reverse of this on foggy mornings. The trees, the vapor will condense on the leaves and then drip around the drip line. So it's almost like a reverse. They capture moisture from fog. But this is canopy interception. And check this out next time it rains when you get out there early. It's really, really neat. You can see the space under this tree is dry for about the first 15 minutes or so. So that first slide was kind of about the hydrologic impacts, slowing the flow, intercepting water, increased evapotranspiration. But for water quality, they do equally an amount of great things. We'll kind of start at the top left here. They shade the stream, and this is critical in urban environments. Again, urban environments are heat islands. The flow coming off parking lots and rooftops and things is often hotter than we would see in rural environments. So trees along streams in urban environments tend to cool the water down, increasing dissolved oxygen. And they also buffer from the wild dissolved oxygen swings. This is a topic maybe for another day, that come from algal activity when you have bright sunlight hitting the water. So you get a burst of activity in the day and zero activity at night. So you get a big DO swing, dissolved oxygen swing. But the trees that overhang that kind of help to buffer that. Again, we got the floodplain here. So surface roughness, again, slowing the flow, trapping nutrients, allowing them to be deposited, slowing flood velocities. Very good stuff when we have roughness along our channels. Increased soil cohesion means less sediment eroded downstream. The wildlife, getting away from the water quality here, the wildlife in this little ribbon of trees in this urban area was incredible compared to the relatively habitat poor suburban landscape that surrounds it. So I counted so many different bird species that I wouldn't have seen if this streamside area had not been here. Little backwaters, and even the floodplain itself. When the flood gets out and deposits, pools of water that linger on the floodplain, and again, little side channels like this that have slower flow, that's great opportunities to remove nitrate from our water. And again, nitrate is a big issue, a water quality issue in Iowa. So any kind of opportunity like that caused from, a wood jam or a meander or sediment deposition is an opportunity to remove nitrate from our streams. Again, woody recruitment from the canopy, very good in shaping the channel, aquatic habitat, slowing down flood velocities. And again, I get it. I'm living on planet Earth here. Some wood jams can be an issue in rural or in urban areas. But again, I just want to point out that there is value in wood in our urban streams. Stream bank stability, phosphorus retention, all these really good things. So none of this stuff would be here if this was a lined concrete channel or if this was a mowed, cool season grass riparian area. I just wanted to point that out, that these streamside areas in urban settings are absolutely critical for water quality and downstream flooding. So there's a number of threats to these areas in urban settings, rural settings too, but today I want to focus on rural settings. And again, this could be hours of discussion, but I just want to kind of cover the biggest one that I see, and the biggest one that I think that master gardeners who are out there working hard every week can really, maybe some lower hanging fruit, not that it's easy, but something that's right there that you could help and work to address to enhance the functioning of these areas and enhance their ability to protect our water and mitigate downstream flooding. And that big threat is invasive species presence. So again, I always tell folks, get out in the early spring and the late fall to take an assessment of urban invasive species. So these species generally, they're not native. They generally leaf out and drop their leaves much earlier in the spring and much later in the fall than our natives. So they stick out like a sore thumb in these times. So this was taken just downstream of my old apartment in Ames here. And you can see, I can see at least 4 invasive species right now. But as you can see, they're almost the entire understory and the entire midstory of this riparian forest. And that's concerning to me, and I'll get to that in a second here, but you can see that they've absolutely taken over this riparian area, and that's negatively impacting how it functions in terms of water quality and quantity. So this is a big thing, is just to kind of train your eye to see these, start being able to identify them, and start knowing how to remove them and replace them with native species, and kind of how to manage these areas so we can maintain that native composition. So I don't know. If y'all are good at your ID, go for it. I can see 4 at least right here. I see garlic mustard. I see honeysuckle, non-native honeysuckle. I see European buckthorn, and I see a weird one. I know because I've been there, but it's hard to tell from the photo. But it's amber cork tree, which is a beautiful tree, but it is problematic and has invasive tendencies and blocks out our native species. So again, these invasives really decrease the functionality of these riparian systems for a number of reasons. Notably, they almost block any chance of native tree seedlings becoming established and getting that next generation of forest going. So this is, you can see the garlic mustard here. This is the worst garlic mustard year I've seen in a while. And it's essentially blocking out any kind of sunlight that a tree seedling would need right after it germinated. So again, very, very concerning there. They're also blocking out spring ephemerals, wildflowers, all those other things that grow and bloom at different times of the year, which has impacts on, the ability of this landscape to trap surface runoff, pollinators, nutrient cycling. It's just, it's very bad and very concerning when these things take over these areas. They release chemicals, allelopathy. So they release chemicals that discourage the growth of other species. They lead to a very, non-diverse structure, which can have wildlife impacts. They're poor wildlife habitat in general. Even like honeysuckle is a nutrient-poor wildlife food. So not just water quality and quantity, but wildlife impacts too. They're just decreasing the functionality of these riparian areas to do their job, protecting our water quality and quantity. There's a ton of them out there, and I'll provide some resources on how you can kind of train your eye to see these and start identifying them and start working to control them in these areas. But honeysuckle, Japanese knotweed is very scary. I've seen this more and more. You can see the rhizome there. It's got a lot of underground energy. It's very hard to control. It's a riparian, tends to be in riparian or streamside areas. Garlic mustard, if I look concerned here, it's because I've never seen garlic mustard like it's been this year. But again, completely blocking out sunlight to the forest floor, which has an impact on many of our native species. So again, I would just start, this is something I think master gardeners would be great on the forefront of, is IDing these things and working with your local environmental boards to get rid of these and replace them with native species, and then working to manage these areas to ensure that native species perpetuate in the future. And that's going to maximize the functioning of these riparian strips of these trees and all the good things they do. So with that, I've got a quick to-do list, kind of fun stuff. Again, I think the essence of today, it wasn't a bunch of graphs and figures and whatnot. I just really wanted you to get on your radar that trees along our streams in both rural and urban settings are absolutely critical for water quality, and really for you to be an advocate for the establishment, management, and protection of these zones. So not only streamside areas, but the urban canopy as well. Just the trees that line our streets, the canopy over our urban areas. So not just along the stream, but all of the urban canopy does wonders for hydrology and water quality in these systems. And start working with your environmental boards to kind of get on their radar too. They're like, hey, these areas are important. They're threatened. They do a ton of great stuff. We need to start managing these appropriately to maximize the water quality benefits that they produce. And really give a push, a big push. And I know master gardeners are great at this, but I'm going to say it again. Push for native species out there. Native species are going to do the best job in these areas. They're going to live the longest. They're going to be the most vigorous. They're going to be the best not only for wildlife, but for water quality. So really, really, really push for native species. And not just along streams, but in your gardens, your yards, your homes, the urban canopy as well. We're all going to be better off if we have a rich assemblage of native species. And I always tell folks, and you know this too, but I'm going to say it again, match the species to the site. That's going to maximize the environmental benefits that tree provides if you match the species to the site where you're dealing with. Again, if you do anything else, just work to know your invasives. Get out there in spring and fall and even summer and just start IDing them and looking at the impact that they have and looking at ways that are feasible to control these and do a switch to more native species. And lastly, and you all are very good at this too, is get out there and volunteer. There's a lot of efforts just here in Ames, if you watch, about working in these invasive species removal, just promoting these streamside areas. So I encourage you to get out there and volunteer and really push the importance of these areas. So here's some resources. There's a ton out there. Again, if you have any questions on anything at all, email me. But here's some kind of resources to start you off. Of course, we've got our Natural Resources Extension website, which is broken down into forestry, wildlife, water quality, and aquaculture pages. So for the forestry page, I'm biased, yes. We've got an interactive tree ID key, which can help you learn your tree identification. We've got a great invasive species page. That can be found at the main page of the Natural Resource site. Videos on how to identify them and how to control them. We've also got a publication about chemical control and mechanical control methods of invasive species. And we've got a lot of resources on there about native species selection. Okay, which tree, which shrub is going to work on this type of soil, on my site, in my yard, along this stream, in this city. So really good stuff there. Urban Forestry, check out the Iowa DNR Urban Forestry page. It's an incredible site, ton of resources on there. Anything you could want about urban forestry, from professional arborist contacts to pruning information, and even just information on the health benefits of urban trees in general. There's a ton of stuff here for landowners, but also communities too that are looking to improve their urban canopy. So really, really good stuff there. This is a cool one. These folks deal a lot more with rural conservation, but they've got a series of recent virtual field days that deal with these streamside areas and streamside trees, and they're really cool. I am biased. I'm in a couple of them, but they're really neat, and they're archived online here if you go to this website and check out their virtual riparian forest buffer field days, both urban and rural. And they've got a ton more content on general conservation in Iowa. So I mean, you could spend weeks looking at all their great stuff on there. So that's iowalearningfarms.org. It's a branch of Iowa State Extension. If you've got a sick tree, this is brand new. So we've getting a lot of sick trees this year. And again, these impact our water quality. If we need healthy, vigorous trees to really maximize their water quality benefit. If you've got a sick tree question in your yard or along your stream, check out this new Iowa DNR kind of page. It can kind of help you identify the problem and what to do about it, and then what species to replace your sick tree with to help you get the urban canopy back up and running. Volunteer opportunities. There's a ton out there. Here's the one that comes to my mind first. It's a nonprofit, Trees Forever. They do a ton of good stuff for not just trees, but like pollinators and all kinds of conservation practices. But obviously, their main focus is trees. But they do a lot of stuff in urban and rural settings. So check out their website for opportunities to go out and enhance these areas and meet some great folks and learn a thing or two as well. Okay, I find this timely. We're kind of stepping away from the stream a little bit. But we had a big storm event. I hope y'all are safe, and I hope your trees are upright, and I hope your cornfields are upright, and I hope everybody's okay. But if you did have damage from the storm, check out our website, and also check out the Iowa DNR urban forestry page. They've got an assemblage of resources there that can help you kind of pick up the pieces from the storm. Things on kind of how to prune following the storm, doing post-storm assessments. Should I remove this tree or not? Is this tree going to make it? Contacts for certified arborists, kind of the industry gold standard of folks to call for tree trimming, removal, and plant healthcare applications. Stuff on chainsaw safety. I know a lot of folks out there are doing it themselves. It's critical to be safety with chainsaws. They're a tool that needs respect. So following this storm, here's some good resources to kind of get you started there. And with that, I really want to thank you all again for having me here, and I really thank Susan and the Master Gardener Program for this opportunity. And I mean, the last thing here is just start being an advocate for these streamside areas and streamside forests out there. They do wonders for water quality, and they're not really mentioned in the water quality conversation in Iowa much. And that's my mission, is to get those at the forefront of the water quality conversation. So get out there and do everything you can to advocate for the protection, the establishment, and the proper management of these areas. Thank you, and have a great day.